Anxiety is not the wound. Anxiety is the symptom of the wound. At the outset, I have to say this before I tell you what anxiety is. Anxiety is not a mental illness. It is not even mental, but it could be called an illness because in Western medicine, our biology is chemistry, as if we are a composite of chemicals and chemical reactions, and our chemistry does go off primarily in the serotonin and dopamine levels in our brain. And what medicine tries to do is handle that. And so because there is a pill for it, we put it as an illness, but it is not. I want everybody to take just 10 seconds to please recognize this. It's not a mental illness. It is not even an illness. It does things that make us feel a certain way, but it is not a mental illness. I want all of us to be absolutely clear about this because there is so much shame and blame and judgment around getting help for anxiety. There's so much angst around, let us say, taking medicine. If you're on medication, superb. Keep it going, and thank you for showing up to try this work. If you have done the test of 76 symptoms and you have more than half, chances are you will need some light medication. Let there be no shame to that. Let there be no judgment to that. Let there be only gratitude and thanks that we live in a world that has options and solutions that allow us to feel better. But before we go there, and before we diagnose that for anybody else, I'm going to tell you what anxiety is. And I want you to check the truth of what I'm about to say. I'm going to digress for 45 seconds. The first stage of healing is acknowledgement. And when I tell you what anxiety is, I'm going to ask you to acknowledge it 10 times. And in acknowledging it, what it really is, you will see you are already feeling better. For those of you all suffering for a long time, and if you have a reaction, that's when you got to squeeze your squeezy. Because the thing with anxiety is that it is so inside that the simplest solution is actually to bring it outside. That if I can just bring my attention to my hand squeezing, or I look outside, okay, there's a bottle. Okay, there's crystal. Oh, there are some plants. The moment I brought it outside, you will feel better. But I'm not going to wait for you to feel worse. First, I'm going to ask you to try that with me, especially for those of you who are great sufferers. And great sufferers means things are happening in the body, but it's also the head that's gone off, right? Can't stop the racy, pacey, hasty, wasty thoughts. I'm going to come to that. But first, I just want you to look at anything in front of you. Look at my, oh, by the way, people, Nidhu is my sister. Look at my gorgeous sister. Look at your neighbor. Look at what's on the right side of you. It's not my right, but sorry. Look at what's on the left side of you. Look at what's on the right side of you. Look at the ground. Look outside of you. And in 10 seconds, your shoulders will calm down. Your breath will ease up. Anxiety brings us into ourselves in very trapped ways. So the moment you take your attention outside, you will feel better. Try it, everybody. Tell me how you are before I tell you what anxiety is, and then ask you to say it 10 times with me.
And also while that's happening, and people, if they're writing in, with the how anxiety reveals itself, there was a poll that people had participated in also. So I do have certain results in. with whatever active participation has happened till the evening. So
Right.
let me know when you want to know about that.
Okay. We'll look at it. We'll come to it because we're going to work on some of the things from that list. And we're going to work on it today.
Right. Have you asked, you did say, right, let me know how you're feeling, as in, are your shoulders down? Are you relaxed?
Yeah.
So either everybody's feeling really good because nobody's written in, or
they're taking time to
they're
focus
taking
outside.
time to focus outside. Yes.
Right. In the meantime, actually, you know what? Let's give it 15 seconds of silence, because that's another thing an anxious-ridden brain cannot handle. But let's do it. Start time.
Priya has said relaxed, and AR has said feeling good. Gaga has said, I can see, but I can't hear. Gaga, just disconnect and come back on again, because we're all very much audible. Lakshmi Priya says, feeling better.
Good. Good. Right? So that's number one. So what? Two things, right? After I ask you to say it 10 times, two things. Number one, you're going to bring your attention outside. And second, you're going to start squeezing, because that also brings your attention outside. Break it, crack it, it's okay. Squeeze. Okay. Shall I tell you what anxiety is?
Dipali says distracted.
Distracted. So squeeze. Squeeze something.
And Noah says, when focusing on our surroundings, we acknowledge gratitude and come out the actual state we were in. Come out of the actual state we were in.
What you give attention to grows. So if you will not give it attention for a moment, it will stop growing. It'll give you some relief. If you're giving attention to something else that is not as threatening. Okay. First, I repeat, anxiety is not a mental illness. But don't be afraid of medication. If required, it will help. What anxiety really is it's too much for me to handle alone. It's too much for me to handle alone. Anxiety is a very active, terrifying fear of being alone, doing it alone, going it alone, managing it alone, handling it alone, fending and protecting yourself alone. Is fear an illness? No. Fear is Mother Nature's way of making sure we live another day. That we don't run up to bears and snakes and tigers, that we don't bungee jump without the bungee. And aloneness? Aloneness is when we were abandoned and left alone. And abandonment can take place in many forms. Neglected, overlooked, rejected, taken for granted, used, misused, abused, betrayed. All of these are forms of abandonment. Take a look at your life and tell me the truth of the sentence. It's too much for me to handle alone.
So Deborah earlier wrote overwhelmed. Dipali says true.
And because, okay, we'll wait for some people.
And earlier, Nitika had written, we come to present moment when we focus on surroundings externally, which is what you were saying, that what you pay attention to grows.
Yeah.
And Tushar also said the feeling of being overwhelmed, but he's put a question mark to it. So are you asking, or are you saying anxiety is the feeling of being overwhelmed?
It is part of it, yes.
Right.
Yes,
Lovely also says, yes, it is too much for me to handle alone.
Alone. 10 times with me. And again, check. Just like as you paid attention slightly outside or you squeezed, when you say this 10 times, something's going to come up. Maybe overwhelm will come up. By the way, one of the fastest releases for overwhelm is to cry, because overwhelm is that suffocating pressure in the chest and lungs and heart functioning. Moment you've cried, your lungs are better. It is the best thing to do. Laughter, tears, sweat, going to the washroom, play, rest, sleep, all of these are nature's way of healing us. So don't be afraid to take medicine if required. Don't be afraid to cry. We all do it. We all have it. Because the fact is that there is nobody on this planet who hasn't been abandoned. And therefore, there is nobody who has not experienced or experiencing anxiety. For some of us, it shows up when the situation shows up. And when the situation goes off, it also goes off. For some of us, it's become a way of life without us even realizing it. And for some of us, it's so terrible, it's so chronic that it makes us want to give up everything. But before I tell you a little bit more about that, 10 times with me, it's too much for me to handle. It's too much for me to handle alone. Sorry. It's too much for me to handle alone. 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 It's too much for me to handle alone.
I'm going to wait for people to respond. And earlier, Archana, Naya, Lekhni, Tanuja, Aloha, everyone wrote true, feeling overwhelmed. And Nitika about crying also. Nitika wrote how true, Nidhu. I nowadays just cry and don't overthink it. I cry and I'm fine after that. Awesome. And Dipali's written in, she feels like screaming.
Okay.
Squeeze.
Squeeze, squeeze, and you are on mute anyway. If you're in a safe place, scream.
Right.
Yeah, because
sorry.
There's an inherent relationship between anxiety and anger. And between today, Thursday, and Saturday, we're going to cover it all.
Oh, and tomorrow also, we will let them know why tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow as well. There's something happening tomorrow.
Jayashi says, almost tears in eyes, feels relaxing. Lucille says, I sing when I'm stressed. Vaishnavi Pratima, did I get this? Yes. Feeling light, she says, and I'm checking. Right. And AR said, agreed to, yes, it is too much for me to handle alone.
Alone. The word being alone. A baby knows this. A fetus in the womb knows this. A child knows this. Teenagers know this, and by God, teenagers know it the best. Adults know this. We cannot survive alone. And therefore, if we have been abandoned and in that moment we are alone, it is also the fear of death. Look at the symptoms of anxiety. Dry mouth, racing heartbeat, palpitations, fibrillation, knots in the stomach, breathlessness. Mind just either it's blanked out completely or it's so hyper and startled that it's trying to look here, it's trying to look there, it's trying to look there, it's trying to look there, it's trying to look there. We fear we're going to die, which is why for those of us who've been suffering a long time, we get suicidal because we say, "Acha, aa jao na fir, ho jao na fir." Let it happen. Let it go, because it's the fear of death. It's the fear of life, because I don't know when the next attack will come. I don't know when I'll be abandoned next. I don't know what I will have to do alone next. It is the fear of living. It is the fear of responsibility. It is the fear of being given jobs we don't have the competencies and capabilities to do. That's why we're dying, right? Because what is the problem with aloneness? Tell me, please, what is the problem with aloneness? And are we ever really alone? Food on your table, thousands of people involved in that coming. So, what is the problem with aloneness? We are not capable, competent, we don't have the training for this particular situation we are in. Whatever this situation is, perhaps you're divorced, perhaps you're still recovering from the death in a family, perhaps you are looking after a parent, perhaps, where, by the way, now the parent has abandoned you, right? Because now you're the parent to the parent. I remember in a yoga class, halfway through, our teacher went out. Cheers, everybody. Not because our teacher went out, but because I felt a little thirsty. Our teacher went out to take a call, and she came back, put her phone on the corner, turned to us and said, 108 Surya Namaskars, everybody. We didn't make that call. We're not the ones who did this. What did she do? She abandoned us. In that moment, right, where you cannot be present and available, abandonment takes place. And therefore, when we don't have someone present and available for us, when we don't have our village, when we don't have our tribe, when we don't have our family, we always feel abandoned, whatever the reason. Therefore, it's not logical sometimes when you take a look at your situation and you're having anxiety or you're having overwhelm because you don't recognize that what it really is it's too much for me to handle alone. My team knows if they send me an Excel sheet, I will reply next year. My COO, Amrish, soul of patience, Shilpa, Neelu, either they have to explain it to me or they have to read it out to me. And maybe 1.5 years back, I was like, it's an Excel sheet. And when I look at it, right, I recognize that what was going on for me, right, when I'm looking at boxes and my attention is inside the box, I am feeling pinned down. I'm feeling like there's a knee in my stomach and a hand pressing down on my chest. I feel caught in the boxes. I cleared it. It's not so bad, but either Shilpa or Neelu still has to read it out to me. The logic of where it happens is not so important as the fact that it's something I can't handle alone. I can't do this on my own. Where will I go? What will I do? Who will I turn to? There's no one for me. My God, if I don't have household help, and clearly I'm talking about India, if I don't have household help, I won't have anybody. And just by the way, ask any Indian woman what she goes through when the maid doesn't show up. Because in that moment, why are we overwhelmed? Is it such a big deal? It's our house. We'll manage. We know where everything is. And yet overwhelmed because it's too much for me to handle alone. And if you have a bigger house, all the more anxiety, all the more panic, all the more overwhelmed. I have done sessions to attract and manifest good maids. I have done sessions where the maid has been behaving badly. I have done sessions where the maid has ghosted the person because it's important enough to us. Does this require the term illness? Does this require shame? Does this require blame? Does this require judgment? No. Can we all show our anxiety some love?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
I want a yes in capital with an exclamation mark.